Good evening, everyone. I'm Emily Actor-Zandi, Managing Director of AtlanticLIVE, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this Atlantic Exchange for a conversation with President and CEO of Edelman, Richard Edelman. Atlantic Exchanges are one-on-one conversations between Atlantic editors and fascinating people doing big things. We featured everyone from Bill Gates to Mark Zuckerberg, Rahm Emanuel, and Penny Pritzker. And tonight, we're delighted to add Richard to that list. Edelman, the world's largest public relations firm, is now in its 15th year of publishing the annual Trust Barometer. A telling piece, the barometer surveys over 30,000 people across 27 countries to analyze trust and confidence in NGOs, media, government, and business. Richard's been named one of the most powerful executives and is consistently ranked as one of the highest-rated CEOs. And he's a prolific blogger as well. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. You should all have a copy of the Trust Barometer on your seats. We have extras if you'd like another after the program. We'll be live tweeting at Atlantic_live, and feel free to chime into the conversation using the hashtag ATLX. We'll also have time at the end of the program for your questions. For friends and colleagues that couldn't be here with us today at the Watergate, they can still join us virtually through our live stream at theatlantic.com/live. And now I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Steve Clemons, the Atlantic's Washington editor-at-large, to lead the conversation. So Steve and Richard, welcome.
Emily, thank you so much. Richard, why don't you join me in these great directors' chairs? I want to say a shout-out to our chairman, David Bradley. It's great to see him. Apparently, there are two reserved seats for two really cool people. So I like the seat. I guess Emily's taking one. So there's one cool person spot left. So if you want to just come up and grab it, you'll make me happy. Yeah. You know, sitting next to David Bradley is a life-altering experience. But it's great to be. Richard, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you. We were together last year, and we had a conversation. And if I can sort of do a quick digest of that conversation, Richard said essentially CEOs and the managers of America's and the world's largest firms were among the least trusted people in the world, and that there was a major problem. And in the way that Richard described it, and I went back later and looked at the data, looked at the findings, found them completely intriguing. I'm a guy who believes in the law of averages. Something that bleak ultimately will get a bounce because it can't be that bad forever. But this year, you've just come out with your barometer of trust, and you've done what I thought was undoable, and that is you've shown that things have actually gotten worse.
Well, we're back with that start. Who can improve it? But we're back to 2009 trust levels, and the reason is we had an unimaginable set of events: North Korea hacking Sony, Ebola, 3 major air crashes, Russia invading Ukraine, a big foreign exchange trading scandal. So. And a sort of failure of institutions to respond to these with alacrity and with excellence. And so, you know, on Ebola, for instance, it took a long time for WHO to say, oh, we've got a problem. And then governments intervened, and again, it was sort of stumbling in the beginning. So I think it's that, but I think it's also that the peace dividend for business is exhausted, that there's a new sort of higher bar. It's not just enough to make money. And I think that's sort of the mindset of business, that many companies just make money.
Does the public get fixed on something like Ebola and says, bad story, things aren't getting better? But at some point, you know, I was reading the president's commendation of Ron Klain the other day. Ron Klain was, for many of you who don't know, our Ebola czar. And he gave this man, who happens to be a friend of mine, but he's one of the most self-effacing, bland bureaucrat types that you can meet, and he just gets stuff done. And the president commended him for actually being that, being in the background, getting things done, putting people together, and so that the Ebola challenge we saw in the world just sort of evaporated very rapidly. Does the public see that? Do they come back and say, wow, now I trust the world, Obama, and Ron Klain, you know, because of Ron Klain more?
Unfortunately not. You know, I think that the imagery over the sort of June period was so staggering, and the sense of kind of institutional dysfunction so strong that there was real concern. And actually, for the first time, there was a drop in trusted non-governmental organizations, which I think is in part attributable to this sort of stumbling response on Ebola.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know if many of you remember the article by Bill Joy in Wired magazine many years ago called "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us." And he said in that article, essentially the advances in microcomputing, nanotechnology, just sort of all of these technological advances would undermine the world as we know it, would create out-of-control problems, and would eventually create things that mankind couldn't control. And what I read in your data this year was something that I found him predicting essentially long ago. And I'm wondering, is this the Bill Joy fear finally being realized?
Well, I think for the first time this year we found that the pace of innovation is actually causing people to lose trust in institutions. And you should say, well, that's crazy. You know, innovation should be a great trust builder. Well, by 2 to 1, it's going too quickly. And the motive for innovation is perceived to be greed and business profit, as opposed to making my life better or better for society by 3 to 1 margin. So both of those are scary.
I don't get this. Isn't this America where greed made Uber, made iPhones, made the Atlantic magazine succeed so well? I mean, like what I've not heard in the United States, particularly among sort of those folks in middle America, that the notion of getting ahead, investing, working hard, that you didn't have to be a kumbaya type to actually succeed and make society better. So what's happened? What's created this socialist yearning?
I don't think it's a socialist yearning per se. I think it's, you know, there are side effects to innovation, on employment, on you know, the sense of regulation, and is there any rule of law, or is it happening faster than government can control it? So I think it's people just being scared. I don't think that they're anti-capitalist. In fact, more than 80% say they think business can make profit and do good for society.
Now, you were just out in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
Can you share with us part of your conversations there?
Well, the venture capitalists and people who work at big companies such as Google.
Google has this line saying, "Do no evil."
Well, and
yeah.
Are
they trusted more than others?
So, you know, last year you may remember that buses that were running from San Francisco down the 101 to Silicon Valley were getting eggs thrown at them by irritated residents because, you know, people were working 18 hours a day, they weren't, you know, giving money back to the community, et cetera. So Google has actually processed this and said, okay, number one, we're actually going to provide bus service for people who don't have the money or whatever wherewithal, not our own employees, but just generally in the community. 2, we're going to encourage our people to do some community work. And 3, take on big issues, you know, whether it's, you know, driverless cars or whatever else. This is all a positive to the community. And the biggest positive I can say out of my trip to Silicon Valley is I think that the tech companies have pivoted to trust. I think they've absorbed the lesson of Uber, which was going down the drain trust-wise, and partnering with Mothers Against Drunk Driving and making sure that drivers are licensed and they're working with government to have an appropriate regulatory scheme. I think that's learning. That's 2 months of David Plouffe.
So what is your prediction on Uber 12 months from now? Is Uber a more trusted, loved, and successful company? Or is Uber a least trusted, disliked, but also successful company?
Well, I think that the sort of pirate ship mentality of a Silicon Valley startup is we just got to go like animals to build our business. And this other stuff will come later, you know, societal acceptance or, you know, worrying about employment issues or retraining. No, that's a false idea. It should be a mutually supporting parallel path kind of initiative. You know, it's hard to come back to something, particularly if you've disrupted and caused all sorts of unemployment or fear. And so that was the big learning from the dinner in Silicon Valley, that it can't just be philanthropy after you've made all your millions. It has to be fix your business model.
You know, it's interesting. Have you ever gone to any of these incubators that are out there hatching sort of new tech firms in sort of accelerators and incubators? We have one in town called 1776, but in many of the cities throughout the Midwest United States, they're trying to sort of seed, bring innovators together. Steve Case calls it the rise of the rest.
Yeah, Chicago has
Yeah.
1871 in the Merchandise Mart. I went to one in Berlin 2 weeks ago.
So if you go into these places, they're full of really good people. They're full of the people you want to run companies because they eat organic. They wear flip-flops. I mean, they sort of have a kind of nice feel, and they sort of mix social entrepreneurship, social good entrepreneurship with various tech innovations they think that would be better. And I was off with Steve Case in Madison and Des Moines and St. Louis, and I kept thinking myself, because I used to work for Richard Nixon, maybe we should have the evil one next to it, and that maybe we would do better, with the evil incubator, maybe not evil, but I mean the folks that were thinking less about the soft and fuzzy sides of things. And because what you're showing in your data is that element of social concern, of thinking a little bit about the pattern, actually is something that will help them financially succeed more than those that don't, if I get it right.
So I think it's really important in the data to see that the longer standing innovations, genetic modified foods, fracking, are two of the least accepted relative to e-health or e-wallet or cloud computing. In part, let's just focus on genetic modified crops. Because it's legal, do we have to label it? Because it's legal, does it mean the consumer has to understand it? I think that's wrong thinking. And interestingly, both in developing markets as well as developed markets, trust in GM foods is 30%. It's terrible. And this is after 25 years of genetic modification. So I just deeply believe it's not just the what and sort of license to operate kind of argument. It's how and why, and you do have the right to know what the data says, what the academic institutions who've studied it, and also that there should be some listening to the consumer.
So if I'm a trout farmer and I'm going to grow really big fish, genetically modified, 40-pound trout, and I
sounds delicious.
Yeah, and I get FDA approval, and I think there is such a big fish out there that's a genetically modified fish that's been approved, but it's highly controversial. The last time I looked into this, how do you tell me as a communications expert? Is there a substantive concern that people, in fact, ought to be concerned about a 40-pound trout? Or is it a communications challenge that you're going to keep the 40-pound trout, so what needs to be achieved is a shift in how that company how Steve Clemons making the trout, sells it, markets, convinces people that their concerns are misplaced? In other words, is it a communications challenge, or actually is there some merit to the concerns that people are collectively feeling today?
I think there's a substance issue. I mean, how is it that you go from a fish this big to a fish this big? I mean, just
science, rationality, the Enlightenment.
Yeah, and what are the side effects? And show me the science and explain to me. Are you changing the fish stock forever? And I think all of these are very valid questions, and I think they have to be answered before you get to the issue of
So answering the substance is part of actually the discourse of reachieving trust.
I think it's the baseline, and again, our data shows clearly that. You have to show the science, you have to show the academic work. It's not enough to just partner with government to get licensed to operate.
Do you eat eggs?
I do.
So, one of the things that's really...
We represent the egg board.
Yeah. Eggs...
Yolks and all.
Yeah, I mean, yolks are what's getting at me right now. The Atlantic is having a big health forum. When is it, Emily? When's our health forum? March 18th. You should all come. We're having a fantastic health forum. We have an editor here named James Hamblin, who does these great video clips on, how, working out at your desk and all that. I mean, it's just a fascinating guy. But what upsets me and what I find very relevant to this is that we're now being told by science that cholesterol is okay. I've been living with guilt as I ate my eggs these many years.
Well, you probably ate margarine a lot, too.
Yeah, no, I actually stayed away from margarine and probably shouldn't have. But now the point is that we've been told all this period of time that eating egg yolks was bad, that it contributed to cholesterol, that cholesterol led to heart disease and artery disease and other factors. And now we're being led to told no. And this is 2015. This is not 1910.
So, Steve, the most important point on this is the...
But it makes me doubt all science.
So, anyway, government is the least trusted institution of the four. NGOs top, then business, then media, then government. And this is a phenomenon of the last 3 or 4 years. And I think it's partly the impasse here and in Brussels. It's also, though, somehow the sense that business gets stuff done. We may not love them, but government doesn't.
Right.
So in that kind of world, an FDA sanction is not sufficient. It means you have to actually build your own playpen and prove it. It's not enough for regulatory approval. So that's change. That's a big change. The least trusted spokesperson, even lower than CEOs, is a government official. That's a real winner. I mean, and so therefore, who is trusted? Mm-hmm. It's a person like yourself, so it's a peer, friends and family, employees, or it's an academic, or a technical expert. So if you have that combination, then you actually theoretically have the ideal.
Do you see right now as I'm interested in this strategic area that, superpowers actually operate in the world more, if they're successful superpowers, by mystique more than by bombing other countries, and that by the time you're bombing other countries, your mystique has been shattered and you can't, because power is really getting other people to do things without you really pushing them. It's the, other sort of that. And I think companies, the mystique is a huge deal, or the corporate brand, or this issues of trust that you have. How do you go about, what's the fastest way, and maybe you've just articulated that, to re-achieving the mystique, re-achieving trust once you've blown it? I mean, I think what you're seeing, what you read this data, and I highly recommend people read this, is the thing here is there's not a lot of trust out there, broadly.
No. Again, we're back to the same environment we had in 2009 after the Great Recession.
But you're also talking globally.
Globally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the United States, by the way, falls in the middle. We're not so bad. The low trust countries.
Who's the worst?
Japan. Now, why is Japan the worst country in trust? It's a word called Fukushima, in which every institution failed the people. Think about it. The government failed the people, business failed the people, the NGOs failed the people, and worst of all, the media failed the people. The local media was reporting what the government said and wounded themselves terribly. So we're talking 3 years ago in Japan, and we're still seeing Japan at the very lowest end, even below, Ireland and some of these other ravaged places.
What are some of the other big disparities? What are the biggest difference between, say, Europeans and Americans?
Well, I would just say Europeans are deeply skeptical of innovation, particularly tech-driven innovation, cloud computing, for example. Germany doesn't like it at all because of privacy, security. It's scary to them. Snowden didn't help, by the way. It doesn't help to be an American brand, actually, in technology. It's one of the reasons the tech companies pushed back so hard on Obama last week when he sort of asked for a back door into Google and Facebook to track down bad guys. Well, it means there's competitive disadvantage for American companies going into Europe at the moment. So Europe is at the low end. At the highest end, interestingly, is India, China, the UAE, and Indonesia. Very high trust in institutions and very easily accepting of innovation.
I mean, you know so many sectors, and one of the areas, just some years ago I was in Korea, and you had the Minister of Technology and Industry outlining what the 10 strategic sectors that Korea would invest in. Yeah. And 9 of them were the same ones they always had been: flat panel displays, semiconductors.
Right.
But then the big one that they popped up were genomics, gene therapy, and this area. And I began thinking, as we were thinking about genetically modified foods, about genetically modified babies. And so you have genetically modified.
There's a leap.
Yeah. Well, no, but I mean, it's a leap that's happening when you begin looking at what's happening at gene therapies. You have people essentially. You have competitions. We're actually going to be doing an Atlantic event around it at some point, looking at the competition between states, at U.S. states, trying to compete to bring resources. Who's the guy who created? I'm blanking on his name, Napster and
Sean.
Sean Parker. Yeah. So Sean Parker is very big into this and trying to get San Francisco to compete and take talent out of Pennsylvania along this line of genomic therapies, and the kind of would lead to designer babies down the road. But an area where this seems to be acceptable are China, Korea, a lot of Asian countries that are also investing in it, don't have the same moral and normative constraints and restrictions. Do you find those?
I think it's more of a developing market, developed versus Asia, Europe, etc.
But in other words, if your level of mistrust in the United States and Europe and maybe elsewhere is more profound in some sectors than what you might find in China. Does that create a strategic gap, a disadvantage in sort of key technologies as you see them from states that are going to be manic and driven just to be techno-determinist? I'm just sort of thinking out with the research you gave me that if you think it through, there's no reason to...
That is possible. That is possible. But I also want to point out that national brand matters hugely. So if you're a company based in China, you have a real trust issue coming into developed markets. Chinese, Russian, Brazilian, Indian, trusted by 20-25% coming into a developed market. Better in the developing markets. Vice versa, developed market brand, US, German, Swiss, going into developing, just fine. 80% trust. So an American tech company comes in with a tremendous advantage over a Korean one, even if it's in genomics.
Wow. Now you did research in 5 sectors, or you tested 5 sectors. What were they?
We looked at health, we looked at financial services, we looked at food, we looked at energy, and we looked at technology.
So when you say something like energy and fracking, we've been going through the Keystone debate. We just had this big derailment, which was quite visually disturbing in West Virginia. I don't know if you saw the giant plumes of fire. You have the fracking concerns out there. If you were to be crowned communications czar for the entire energy and industry, what would you do? What would you tell them to do? Are you already energy czar for the entire community?
No, but the best stories are actually the real stories of how good these energy companies are at fracking. Chevron and others are superb and set a great standard, and they should talk about how they do what they do. And they do. And you go to Chevron.com, you can see it. And I think energy companies tell their stories and succeed. And interestingly, in developing markets, energy companies are hugely highly trusted because they're associated with, we're going to make the society work better, we're going to get ahead. So tech, energy, and banking are the highest 3. Whereas in the West, banking is at the bottom along with media.
The banking is high where?
In China, and high in India, and high in United Arab Emirates. Very high.
But in China, they just jailed under corruption charges one of the heads of their largest banks.
Yeah.
So does that shake things in China? Have you looked into China? I mean, are these corruption purges that are going on right now translating into doubt by the average? I mean, I know that average Chinese doubts the government because of the environmental hell they're living through.
Correct.
But is the corruption stuff adding to that level of doubt, or is it adding to a sense, wow, we're cleaning things up and we're going to have a better future?
So the biggest drop this year in China was in trust in NGOs. And we checked on why that is, and also dropped hugely in the UK, for example. Why? Well, NGOs are expected to perform because they're now seen as the 5th estate in global governance. So it's not just another institution. Also, you have to be very local as an NGO, and not just worry about Ebola, but worry about what's happening in the UK in education or something. So it's both.
When we're on the phone and talking the other day, I liked your terminology of looking at high trust environments and low trust environments. Yes. I used to write about the Bill Clinton world was the era of high trust economics. You had just-in-time money, just-in-time jobs. You had an abundance of trust that America would never hit an iceberg and that things would be great. And we engaged in a lot of behaviors that looked to be bad now that you look back. And so,
but Steve, the fascinating,
and we shifted to a very high fear.
But the fascinating dichotomy is we may have low trust in institutions, but all of a sudden we have the success of the sharing economy.
Right.
Now think about Airbnb, Uber, etc. Is premised on peer reviews and your belief and trust in your fellow person. And that's the whole idea of horizontal trust instead of vertical trust. Instead of it being conveyed by Moses down to the people from the mountain, it is now person to person, all those, Hebrews who were, my predecessors, running around in, the Holy Land.
I sort of think that's happening with Uber, that despite Travis Kalanick, who's a, pretty tough son of a gun, that Uber X drivers who are out there with their family cars and women here in town from the Middle East or wherever they may be, who are trying to make, that you end up with, empathizing with them. And so they're part of I trust that UberX driver a lot more than I trust maybe the executives behind Uber who are tracking where we go.
I also think that the phenomenon of media and the unbelievable shift to the fact that people trust search the most and brands less. Both on the first...
Use Google, Bing, Yahoo,
Google,
what do you
Bing,
search?
whatever else. So
is there one that's trusted more than the other?
No, it's just, we describe search, but the most important finding, therefore, for communications people is that the so-called born digital, the Quartz kind of brand,
owned by the Atlantic Media Company,
I'm happy to mention,
yeah.
is actually maybe the first place you put a story as opposed to in a mainstream media, because it's search optimized. It has a lot of social credo and credibility.
So on this issue of high trust, low trust, but is there a thing that society, so I'm interested in the United States, I think we did get into a low trust period. You saw it both
in 2004 after
issues,
Iraq. Right.
You saw it also in the economic arena with the subprime crisis.
Right.
I'm interested in, both from a substantive perspective, but also with your expertise in communications. How do you advise, because I know that you sort of think there needs to be this hybrid orientation between companies thinking about social needs, about regulation, and leaning in towards that in a positive way. How do you breed a culture that is going to be hybrid in that sense and realize we can neither have abnormally high trust or abnormally low trust? We need to be somewhere in the middle. Because it seems to me the U.S. government is not based on everybody being nice. The U.S. government is based on branches of government ruthlessly pursuing their interests and clashing with each other.
And performing.
And performing. And I'm interested in how you negotiate the middle that I think you're advocating.
I think organizations, whether you're in government or whether you're in business or anything, you have to say what you're going to do, measure it, and release that information and show, in fact, that you are performing. It's not sufficient any longer to also operate in a bubble. You actually have to cooperate with other stakeholder groups, NGOs, government, others, and communities. And by the way, one important point to make for business is to build advocacy organizations to help sell propositions in Washington is a fundamental and good thing to do. It is grassroots, done properly, will help actually unlock the impasse. It cannot be that your opposition can do one thing and you can't do anything. All you can do is go lobby on the Hill. That doesn't work anymore. You actually have to pursue this idea of a horizontal kind of organization from the bottom up in the same way that NGOs or others do.
Do you know David Crane of NRG?
I don't.
Some of you know NRG. NRG, it's an interesting company. Paul. It's interesting because David has been here and I've interviewed him. Will talk about and confess that he's one of the worst polluters in the United States. He has more he just lays it out there. I'm one of the worst polluters. And he says, I want out of that business. But the only way I'm going to get out of that business is by working with millennials who know social media techniques, who communicate, who flock together, who swim together, that their demands, their patterns of their behavior is going to change the way in which we polluting energy companies interact with
I'll give you an example.
So it sort of seems to be your guy.
So Unilever with
Paul Pullman, right?
Exactly, yeah. Paul Pullman, Project Sunlight, asked people to do acts of sustainability. We had some fun with it. We suggested this idea of shower sharing.
Like literal shower sharing?
Yeah,
or
like literal shower sharing.
Like
girlfriend, boyfriend, boyfriend, whatever, who cares?
My partner teaches at Washington College, and it's actually popular there.
Yeah, but shower sharing is awesome.
It's called green showers.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
But the point is to commit to shorter showers or cold water wash, or I'll commute on my bike instead of in a car, or whatever it is. And 80 million.
And this was an Edelman idea?
No, this was Unilever's idea.
Okay.
We helped.
I see.
But 80 million people signed up to do these.
Wow.
And it was social. It was inherently social. Facebook became the key platform, and off we went.
Fascinating.
That was really good.
For those of you who know, Paul Pullman is the guy, fascinating. He when he became CEO of Unilever, he suspended quarterly guidance. And I said, how did you get away with that with shareholders and other analysts? And he says, well, they couldn't fire me on the day they hired me. And it was a great line that he used. But it was, but I think that these innovations are out there. And one of the things,
but just on this point, leaders actually of corporations are now a trust detractor.
right.
The reputation of business is at 60. The reputation and trust in a CEO is at 40. And it's worse in Germany and Canada and France.
So how do you fix it?
CEOs
open to the company, because I think this is really important. In our business, we have an event business, and if I gave him softball questions and made Richard Edelman have just a fluff job here, we would look really bad, right? I mean, it was not a way to run an exercise. And an events person at a different major media company called today and was really interested in how the Atlantic dealt with its governance, its editorial reviews, how we got this right, because there's a lot of sloppiness out there. And I said, I want to give you everything we have because it's in my interest that you improve. Yeah. Because if you improve, then we're at less risk of an industry impact that impacts all of us. And I did this today in part because I knew we were going to meet. And it made me think that if you were going to change the way CEOs and corporate management was perceived in societies, don't we need a best practices manual? Don't you need a sort of critical mass of people to say to Richard, with Richard Edelman, okay, we're going to commit to a less greedy direction. Let's call it. Some X way of doing that. Is that a?
You have a lot. You have a lot of countercurrents. You have tremendous pressure for quarterly results, in part because activist investors are pushing this. At the same time, you also have, it seems to me, exemplary CEOs, Jeff Immelt of GE or Howard Schultz of Starbucks, Indra Nooyi of PepsiCo, who are very clear about, look, I'm playing this for 5 to 7 years. I'm not playing for 1 year. I'm playing for long-term value. I'm also going to make sure that my supply chain and all the other parts of the business are moving towards a sustainable world because it's smart for business. 25% of GE's revenue come from eco-imagination branded products, locomotives, turbines, etc. From 0 10 years ago.
What advice would you give NBC regarding the Brian Williams stuff?
I think that Deb Toness did what she had to do and put him on leave until the investigation is.
But there's obviously a trust issue there that contributes to the concerns Americans have. I mean, we have Brian Williams in that unfortunate storytelling. It contributes to this doubt of the brand name. So when I hear Indra Nooyi, I hear Jeff Immelt, what goes off in my mind is, can you really trust Jeff Immelt? Can you really trust Indra Nooyi? Don't we have to question our trust in all of those institutions and people?
Well, I think unfortunately there have been enough examples in business that are bad. But I also believe that CEOs make a terrible mistake of hiding and not exposing themselves to the so-called risk of having an open discourse with editors such as you. It's part of the job, and it's also part of the job, one way and another, to find ways to be part of the public discourse. So GE helping to employ vets coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Terrific. And having some sort of equivalence between 10 years as a helicopter pilot and some kind of specific degree in engineering. Good. That's important.
You have, just in the press release, something that really caught my eye. You said that government trust is below 50% in 19 of 27 countries, including the United States at 41%, the UK at 43%, Mexico at 33%, and Japan at 40%. So I'm really interested in, why is Mexico relatively better off given all the stuff we see going on down there? And what did the British do that was so bad?
Well, I think people lost trust in the UK government this year, partly because of the referendum, which was pretty close in Scotland. The questions about UKIP.
So Scotland was that divisive?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Definitely. And by the way, I also think the UK has a real issue of what's the future of its media? The media in Britain, because of phone hacking, is bad. Sensationalist. It's perceived badly. mean, we had a period when media was rallying as an institution, partly because of the bigger house. But now with single-source journalism, phone hacking, other things, this is having and also constrained economics, it's having a real impact on the credibility.
But in this climate, you have companies like Vice, which I find sort of guerrilla media coming up and succeeding spectacularly, at least in the short term, where the way in which they recruit and bring on stringers that they work across really tough environments around the world, they bring it in, they amalgamate it, it has kind of a rougher edge, it's more gritty, and people seem to be okay with that. But I'm not sure that that's what, as an Atlantic guy, maybe I'm spoiled, but a lot of the world seems to be ready to trust that sort of, I would find, questionably dependable media structures. Why do you think that's happening?
Look, I think to a certain extent, as companies or others, you have to go where people's eyeballs are, and you have to somehow orient to the format. So President Obama had a BuzzFeed video the other day that it was like criticized deeply in the Wall Street Journal today, which maybe is predictable anyway. But it seems to me that at least he got his message across to a rather different constituency in a style in which they actually want to see it. Holding a stick camera, all sorts of things that people go, oh, I'm 20 years old, I do that myself. He's not some old stiff. Good, smart. And maybe corporations should learn something from that. Instead of always sitting there, suit and tie like this, hello, talking to you from behind the desk in Rockefeller Center, home of capitalism. I mean, a lot of these CEOs, they're...
Will you come down for an Atlantic beer bash?
Sure.
Yeah, cool. We'll do that next time. Is that okay, David?
I'm participating in a Tough Mudder in May, so I want you to come with me.
It's a deal. I'll take a lot of Advil in advance.
Yes, I'm going to do that too. And after.
Well, let me, just to wrap this up, because I want to open up to the floor. I think that the arena of communications, which you're in, and you're one of the giants in the communications area, and I think this question between what you're sending as a signal to these CEOs is clean up your act, demonstrate social concern, understand that there are regulations that could be good. I know you were talking to some high-tech investors, and the high-tech investors saying, our guys need to become muscled up and strong, and that has to be their focus. And you're saying that can't be their only focus. And I'm interested in how that's being heard. Have you had any impact that you know of on the real behavior as opposed to the cosmetic behavior of your constituents that you're feeding this material to?
I think business actually has generally gotten the message.
So next year I'll be right and things will be better.
I think things will improve for next year. I don't think we're also going to have that series of horrific unimaginables. And I think economies will
And I'm
more
thinking
or less
things
but
every week can't possibly get worse. And then the next week it can't possibly get worse.
But I'll tell you one thing that I am deeply concerned about, which is the pressure on the middle class, the sense of the 1%, the have-nots. I think Gap, for instance, was deeply, deeply smart to raise the wages of its store workers without waiting for the minimum wage. I think that's very intelligent and significant in sending a signal to all that some kind of wage consideration. The evaporation of the middle class is a real problem.
And that's not going to be fixed anytime soon.
No, but I think business actually can arguably ask for more in terms of productivity by paying more. And that's at least something worth considering, as opposed to, we can get away with paying $8 an hour because it's minimum wage, and that's what we're going to do.
Have you thought of running for office?
No.
Just wanted to have that message. Okay, let me open up the floor. Yes, right here. And we have a microphone. This is the great Lindsay Holloway, and we want our folks online to hear you. Yes.
Great. Hi, Mr. Edelman. I'm Katie Luvis with GlaxoSmithKline, and I've been following your work for years on this trust barometer. If you were to have a gold star for any industry or sector that has improved over the last 15 years, who would get it?
And how's GSK doing?
I think the car business has actually turned around the most.
Interesting.
I think the car business was deeply controlled, communication, definitely from the mountain down. I think it's become much, much more focused on vision of car, the future, electric car, and also
Not covering up scandals.
yes, I think that's critical, and also holding people to account when they don't perform, and making changes at General Motors or other places. And so the car business was number 9 in our list of 10 in the beginning, and now it's number 2 or 3. And so it's a phoenix from the ashes. That's really come around.
That is
now,
tweetable. Richard Edelman gives auto industry gold star. I think
but-
that's 122 characters.
Yeah,
It's at Richard Edelman, right?
it is.
Marvin Amori. We should go into business together on the 40-pound trout.
Is it yours?
No.
It's not.
No,
Oh,
he's
sorry.
as opposed to 40-pound trout as you could be.
Thanks. I'm Marvin Amori, and I look at this and I want to find a silver lining for you, Steve.
Yeah?
And I see trust falling, and I think that means people are becoming more skeptical rightly. They're becoming more informed. And so I advocate on an issue called net neutrality, that all the grassroots stuff you're talking about. And our whole goal was to explain to the public, you can't trust the government on this issue. You can't trust companies. And to me, I see China near the top. I see India near the top. I think these people aren't skeptical enough. And I'm actually heartened by the drop in trust. So tell me why I'm wrong and why Stephen shouldn't be happy with my read.
I think trust is actually conveyed differently now, not only horizontally, but a little bit like the butterfly going to multiple flowers to check. So the average informed person has 8 daily sources of information. That's totally different from 5 or 8 years ago.
Right.
And shorter interactions, but more frequent during a day. And so, and I also think it's a pastiche somehow of experts, friends and family, colleagues. You're hearing it from a lot of different places. And therefore, when you do communication, it has to be surround sound. And it has to be deeply scientific, but it also has to be shareable and human and way in which that people want to consume it. So it's got to be all of those things. It can't be and, it has to be and, not or.
Paula Stern?
Yes, Paula Stern, thank you so much. My question comes from somebody who wrote in The Atlantic back in 1970 an article called The Womanly Image, Character Assassination for the Ages. That's me. And we didn't talk about women. You talked about business models. I'm wondering, what about business cultures, particularly in the tech world?
So, Paul, I've got a really important statistic for you.
Great.
Women are 20 points less trusting in innovation than men.
Well, I'll have
Why?
yes.
So, my hypothesis, I'm desperate to hear yours, is we're the custodian of the family. It's not all about personal benefit. It's not like how I'm going to exercise harder and be more jocko. It's how my kid's going to be. What about the future of the world? And women think that way.
And women are the biggest consumers in the world.
Correct.
In addition. And women are participating in the tech world, this great Googles of the world and all the others.
I mean, aren't you
in a
helping-
declining participation,
Aren't-
18%.
But aren't you trying to help engage? I mean, I know you're
Yes,
trying to help
National
get more
Center
women
for
involved
Women
in
in
tech.
Information Technology, in which we are trying to change the culture. So I'm just trying to adapt that to your terrific work on trust and how you advise corporations to assure that they have the trust of their consumers, et cetera. And that is at the cultural level within the company when they are innovating, developing, creating new innovation.
I think you have to measure it. If you don't measure it as importantly as the P&L, then you're in trouble. It has to be public acceptance or sustainability or all these other factors. And again, some companies are doing this. PepsiCo, I know, does. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, right here in front.
And maybe because of Indra.
I
think
promise
about
to work
that.
over here too.
Are the companies for whom trust is less important, or sectors in which trust is less important? I mean, I remember looking for gas one night right after BP leaked all over the Gulf, and the only station I saw was a BP station. I thought about it, but I needed gas.
Said I'm just gonna walk tonight.
Right. Oh, what about Altria, Philip Morris? Well,
So
what do they
let's
care?
let's use a good example of a sector that arguably has been in the doldrums for 5 years, financial services, where you could argue that a lot of it is, business to business, and, if Bank X is liked by CEOs, who cares? I think it has a huge effect on their business model, actually, by having to have much more capital that they keep, on their balance sheets, by having a much less ability to innovate, much less permission to innovate on reverse mortgages or other things. And again, I don't think it's solved by philanthropy. I think it's solved by education and by understanding of how products work and what the ramifications are. And wherever Lee is, Lee Ullman, we've been working together on McGraw-Hill Financial, Standard & Poor's ratings. They've fixed how they do ratings. They didn't imagine a black swan sufficiently in coincident housing declines in every market. That's what happened. They've changed their models. They've changed their people. That's all you can do. But then you go back to the market and say, okay, we're back in business.
Yeah, over here, very short, okay? Right here, Michael.
Thank you. My name is Yaya Fanusi. I used to be a professor on organizational behavior and performance evaluation. And I worked for California Public Utilities Commission, the state government, for 30 years. One of the interesting things when you're dealing with trust, and I'm not privy to the methodology you used, but do you check on how the incompetence of those people might be a factor in the level of trust and lack of trust?
So last year, we didn't ask it this year, but I think you'll be humored. So last year we found that the issue on trust for business is the sense that business may be a little illicit or, going too far. With government, it's not only that they're illicit, it's that they're incompetent. So they have forehand and backhand. And so that's the story, as you might have guessed. Yeah.
Yes, right here in the middle.
Does the word will or can get you a higher score on the Edelman Trust Barometer? Jeb Bush today said, here's how America can regain its leadership in the world. Should Bush have said, will regain?
This is an English professor. Look, I actually think that neither word is sufficient. It's show me. That's the prove to me that this is okay. Don't give me all these cheerleading words. Give me data. Give me the facts. Let me share my data. That's why, again, these sharing economy companies work so well. That's their business premise, Yelp, etc. Peer reviews. If peer reviews were standard for business, we'd have a different structure.
Yes, right here in the front. Oh, we'll go to both of you. You go first. She's there, and I'm worried about Lindsay's feet.
Hi, Jeff Wilklow. Of the 80 million people who signed up for Energy Share, how many of those were green showers? No, that's not my real question. I'm sorry. I work with Campbell & Company. We work with the nonprofit sector. So my question is examples of NGOs who are using their trust in partnership with businesses to advance both of their interests, or vice versa, businesses who do a good job partnering with the NGOs to advance what they're trying to do.
So I think Rainforest Alliance is a perfect example of an institution that's grown to incorporate a almost business side where they consult to corporations and try to create a venture, as I know Unilever's doing with tea farmers in Kenya, to try and get them to grow better crops and change the way that they do business, and then Unilever agrees to buy their output that's higher value and whatnot, but brokered by Rainforest. I think, again, the companies that have done this best, again, I would go actually to the energy sector. I think on HIV, Chevron, for instance, with AIDS testing in Africa and working very closely with various NGOs for testing of their employees is a big deal.
Right here, yes.
Hi, I'm Gadi Ben Yehuda. Oh, stamp, sorry. Hello. First, I kind of wanted to say, like my bit of analysis where, you said the 20% of or women were 20 points higher not to trust business innovations.
Lower.
20 points lower, right?
Lower.
Well, 20 points lower to trust, 20
Yes.
points are to not trust.
They trust
and,
less.
I guess to trust less. I think, from my, quick read of it, I think it would be because I would at least wonder if it would be because women would see business innovations as someone trying to make another buck off of them without necessarily giving them anything in return. Whereas men might be, hey, this is great and whiz-bangy, let's give it a try. And a woman might be, I know what I have works, and I'm wondering if the reason someone is coming up with something different is so that they can, take the money that I would be spending on something else.
I think it's just, I think it's more of a societal concern. It's just concern for their kids and side effects. I think guys think less about that stuff. Collateral damage, like if I break it, so what? Women are worried about breaking it.
The other question that I have is, so you talk in here about people's distrust in media and people's distrust in government officials, and it has been my experience certainly that people who watch, for example, Fox News completely trust it
Right.
and don't trust anything else,
Right.
and NPR listeners perhaps the same. And then with regards to the government, Congress has an 11% approval rating, and yet incumbents are 98% likely to win re-election. So it's I don't trust Congress, but I trust my representative. I don't trust media, but I trust my media. How do you score that? How do you take that into consideration in your analysis?
So I definitely think that the self-referential aspect of media has grown. People choose that media which reflects their views. But I think when they talk about media in general, they want also somehow to have a viewpoint or a set of facts that is moving behavior, and are willing one way and another to listen to that.
It's very interesting, if I may. The Atlantic has a partnership, a national partnership with the College Board right now, which conducts the SAT. And if you talk to the analysts at College Board, they can tell you that the essays that young people are writing are increasingly self-referential, less engaged with analysis and critical thinking of stuff that's out in the world. And we have initiated a partnership, a competition, if you will, that goes to all the AP writing classes, offering prizes and being published in the Atlantic to essentially engage and show their skills at critical writing and analyzing things that are outside themselves. And it's a really interesting comment that you just made about this self-referential world. If you read Eli Preezer's book, The Filter Bubble, it also helps give you that sense. That's why I'm surprised they trust search. I wouldn't trust search. I actually got 3 different computers once, new computers. One was an Atlantic computer, and David, I'm still using it. But and just began searching and going to different sites, so conservative sites, liberal sites, foreign sites, international sites. And over time, you can actually see the difference in results that are fed to you that come when you do searches. And perhaps this isn't well known out there. He's done a TED Talk or whatever. But search is the last thing I would think that people would automatically trust because of everything out there showing that things can be filtered to them that reinforce preferences they already have.
I'll tell you, one other thing that I haven't mentioned yet is the bold act by a corporation actually can have a huge impact. So when CVS took cigarettes out of the stores, they took $2 billion in revenue on $46 billion out of their revenue stream. But their preference went from third place to tied for first because people went, my God, this is a big deal. And when they launched it, it turned out that the CEO's dad had died of lung cancer at 60. He was turning 60. All this kind of story, people went, my God, now I understand the logic of this. It was a personal thing. It was a professional thing. It was a positioning thing. But it was bold.
Did it change CVS's bottom line over time?
Completely.
Yeah. Oh.
It has allowed them to become a health company, and they are now CVS. They have another name. It's called CVS. No, CVS Health. They have a.
Oh, hold on. David Bradley.
Your Honor.
Richard, I'm really interested in this, and it's all newsworthy for me. Treat me as a client for a moment. Let's posit, I don't know this to be the case, but let's posit that Atlantic has good trust at the client level. So what would you do with that? What could I do to bring that to life and to make that meaningful as a business owner?
For me, you have the wonderful aspect of convener, as you are doing here, intellectual property, collector, disseminator, provoker. There's such a opening because in a certain way everybody else is dumbing down and you're smartening up, and you know you're going counter trend, and you're going to meet what people need actually. Wherever you were asking, you know, the self-referential aspect, you got to jolt people out of that and say you've got to come and to the Atlantic site because it's such a provocative story about GM foods or whatever it is. But by the way, there's also a debate, and there's farmers who are going to be debating with, you know, consumers, and, you know, but bring it to life. Make it easy. Make it easier in some way.
And digital.
Yeah.
Helga Flores-Trejo.
Hello, thanks, Steve. Helga Flores with the Inter-American Development Bank Group. It seems to me that one of the main recommendations you're giving to gaining trust is transparency. And some time ago, the bank did a poll in 5 major cities in Latin America right after all the mass demonstrations in Brazil about what would the priorities be of citizens in terms of their infrastructure. And surprisingly, before water, energy, and other services, transparency came up in the agenda. So it seems exactly to validate what you're saying. But who's doing it well? Do you have an example of a corporation, of a mayor, or of an institution that is able to not just release data, because data is there, but be perceived as transparent enough?
So I think Rahm Emanuel in Chicago is doing it well. I know you interviewed him recently. His data on reading scores. He even has data for the snow plows. Which,
and garbage
having grown
trucks.
up there, and garbage trucks.
It's amazing.
Where they are, how many things they picked up,
which way they should turn. He saved $18 million
but
on garbage truck turning strategies.
Every dollar counts.
But you know, I know he said he took the money from that to fund some things in schools that he couldn't fund, and people were very supportive. And I asked him the interesting question because, you know, when you meet Mike Bloomberg, you meet Garcetti in L.A., you meet Rahm Emanuel, these are data-obsessed people. But the question is that the governments that they've taken over aren't filled with data-obsessed people.
But they also, Steve, they operate in verticals, and you actually have to operate horizontally.
Right.
Problems, you know, are actually not solvable by, you know, Department of Traffic and Department of Mass Transit. It has to be together, right?
Right.
And cross-functional.
That's training, important. Yeah, and bringing people in.
Yeah.
Yes, right here in the front. This will be our last question, and then we'll have some more wine.
Hi, I had 2 questions.
Yes.
First one is a quantitative. I was wondering what the range is between the most trusting countries and the least. What is the gap between the most trusting and the
About
least?
60 points.
Okay, so at the top it's like
80 something,
and
the
goes down
bottom
to
20 something.
Is it like a Scandinavian country? All Scandinavian countries are always trusted.
No.
No? It's interesting.
It's the UAE. And,
Really?
Yeah, and China and India.
And
An autocracy? No.
that was the second part of my
Okay,
question.
and-
Why do you think those are the most trusting countries? Is it because they're autocratic and they're told to bow to authority, or do you have a different theory?
I have a different theory. I think their economies are pretty good. I think in India's case, they had an election. They're happy. And, you know, they haven't had Fukushima.
Well, did it change a lot since the election?
I mean, India, trust in government bounced by 40 points.
Wow.
Huge. The Modi factor is immense. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I recommend, I've spent some time both in this trust barometer, but if you go online, you can get previous year trust barometers. I'm not going to be your PR agent. I mean, I could be if you need a communications guy. But, you know, it's interesting to track this over time. And I was really intrigued with our conversation last year about these trends and where they're going. And I really appreciate you sharing with us the methodology, how you're thinking, the groups. And I look forward to doing this again when things have finally improved.
Next year.
So,
Let's do it.
Well, great. Richard, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Richard Edelman, thank you.